Blood does not lie, and the blood smeared across Thaddeus Whitmore's fence posts told a story he didn't want to read. For 12 years, nothing had broken the quiet of his ranch, except wind and cows. But there she was, fallen against the old wooden fence. Her dress was ripped. She was breathing slowly, alive, but just barely. Thorne had built this loneliness on purpose. After what happened to his family, after the fire, after people blamed him for things that followed him, like smoke, he'd picked this empty place. No neighbors for miles, no visitors, no problems. Just him, his cows, and the kind of quiet that comes when the world forgets about you. He stood 30 feet away, holding his gun loosely in his hands. He looked at the woman who had broken his carefully built quiet life. She couldn't be more than 30 years old. Dark hair messy with dirt and something darker, her hands pressed against her side where her clothes had torn and blood had come through. She hadn't seen him yet. Her eyes were closed. Her face was pale as morning ice. Every feeling inside him screamed to turn around. Walk back to the house. Pretend he'd never seen her. In his life, helping strangers only brought trouble. And trouble was the one thing Thorne Whitmore had promised never to let back into his life. But she moved against the fence. A small sound came from her lips. Pain mixed with being very tired. Something in that sound cut through 12 years of carefully built walls. He found himself taking a step forward. Then another. She opened her eyes when his shadow fell across her. Green eyes, sharp even with the pain. They looked at him with fear and desperate hope that made his chest feel tight. She tried to speak, but only made a whisper he couldn't quite hear. Thorne bent down low, keeping the gun across his knees. He stayed far away, even as he moved closer. Up close he could see how badly she was hurt. Cuts on her arms, bruises along her jaw, and that wound on her side that had soaked through her dress. Someone had hurt her very badly. She was able to speak then. Her voice was cracked and rough. Please, they're coming. Those two words changed everything. Because if someone was coming, if someone was hunting this woman, then his 12 years of peace were about to end. Whether he helped her or not. And Thorne Whitmore was about to face the one choice he'd spent over 10 years avoiding. Getting mixed up in someone else's fight. But as he looked into those desperate green eyes, he knew the choice might already be made for him. Thorne's first feeling was to leave her there. His second was to help. His third, the one that won, was to get answers before either choice got him killed. Who's coming? He asked, looking toward the far land where dust clouds could hide men on horses coming closer. She tried to sit up straighter, making a face as moving pulled at her wounds. Men from Dead Rock Canyon. 3 of them, maybe 4. Her voice carried the kind of tiredness that came from running hard and long. They'd been following me since yesterday. Dead Rock Canyon. Thorne knew the place. A town 40 miles south known for 2 things. Digging for silver, and the kind of men who asked no questions about a person's past. If she'd run from there, she'd either stolen something valuable, or seen something she wasn't supposed to see. What did you do? The question came out harder than he meant. But 12 years of being alone had worn away. Most of his nice manners. Her eyes flashed with something between anger and hurt. What makes you think I did anything wrong? Because innocent people don't usually end up bleeding against my fence posts with killers following them. She looked away. Her jaw got tight. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke so quietly he had to lean closer to hear. I saw them murder a family. The Hendersons. They had a piece of land near the canyon. Found something worth killing for. Her hands shook as she pressed them tighter against her side. I was there to buy supplies. Wrong place, wrong time. Thorne looked at her face, trying to see if she was lying. He'd gotten good at reading people in his years before being alone. Had to be in his line of work. But her eyes stayed steady, and the shake in her voice sounded like hurt, not lies. So you ran, he said. What else was I supposed to do? Stay and let them kill the only person who saw. She looked at him again. They killed a whole family over whatever the Hendersons found. You think they'd think twice about killing one more person? A sound drifted across the plains. Far away, but clear. Hoofbeats. Many horses riding hard. Thorne stood up. Gun ready. Eyes looking at the far land. There. A dust cloud, maybe 2 miles out. Moving fast, toward his land. For riders, just like she'd said. The woman, he still didn't know her name, tried to stand using the fence to help her. Please, she whispered. I won't bring you trouble. Just point me toward water, and I'll keep running. But Thorne was already thinking. 4 armed men, probably desperate to hide their secret. If they'd kill a family for whatever the Hendersons had found, They wouldn't leave anyone alive. And now that they'd followed her to his land, he was already mixed up in this whether he liked it or not. The hoofbeats were getting closer. In less than 10 minutes, those riders would come over the hill and see his ranch. They'd see her. They'd see him. And Thorne Whitmore would have to decide whether 12 years of peaceful being alone was worth dying for. Thorne made his decision in the space between one heartbeat and the next, not because he was brave, and certainly not because he was foolish. He made it because he saw something in the woman's eyes. The same desperate, trapped look he'd seen in his own mirror 12 years ago. "Can you walk?" he asked. "Already moving." She nodded, though the way she gripped the fence post said walking would be more hope than real. "My name's Serafina Caldwell," she said, as he put an arm around her waist, helping her wait. "Sarah, Thorne Whitmore. And we're about to get very well acquainted with my root cellar." The cellar was his safety plan, a hidden space beneath the kitchen floor where he'd stored emergency supplies. And if he was honest, where he'd planned to hide if his past ever caught up with him. He'd never thought about hiding someone else. As they hurried toward the house, Sarah stumbled. Her legs gave out. Without thinking, Thorne picked her up, carrying her the rest of the way. She was lighter than he'd expected, fragile in a way that made his chest tighten with a feeling he'd buried years ago. The hoofbeats were louder now, close enough that he could tell different horses apart. Inside the house, Thorne sat Sarah down and pulled up the hidden trapdoor. The cellar was small but well stocked. Water, dried food, medical supplies. He'd learned how important it was to be ready the hard way. "There's bandages down there," he said, helping her down the ladder. "Take care of your wounds. Stay quiet, no matter what you hear." Sarah grabbed his wrist before he could close the door. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me. Don't know if I'm telling the truth." Thorne looked down at her turned-up face. Saw the real confusion there. How long had it been since someone had shown her kindness without wanting something back? "Maybe I know the look of someone running from something they can't fight," he said. Quietly, "maybe I know what it's like to have nowhere else to go." Before she could answer, he closed the trapdoor and put the rug back over it. The coming horses were maybe a minute away now. He could hear them clearly. For riders, just as Sarah had said, their horses breathing hard from a long chase. Thorne checked his gun, then moved to the window. The riders came over the hill in a cloud of dust and anger. They spread out as they came toward his land. Hard men with harder faces. The kind who wore their meanness like other men wore hats. The leader, a tall man with a scar running from his ear to his jaw, raised his hand. The group stopped 50 yards from the house. Even at that distance, Thorne could see the cold thinking in the man's eyes. "You Whitmore," the scarred man called out. Thorne stepped onto his porch, gun held easy but ready. "Depends who's asking." "Name's Kane Murdoch. We're tracking a woman. Dangerous criminal. You've seen anyone come through here?" And there it was. The lie that would force Thorne to choose between his safety and doing what's right. Because he could see in Murdoch's eyes that this man had killed before and would kill again without thinking twice. Thorne had lied before. During the war, after the war, and in the dark years that followed, when truth was something he couldn't afford. But standing on his porch facing Kane Murdoch, he knew this lie would cost him everything he'd built. "Haven't seen a soul in weeks," Thorne said. His voice stayed steady despite the weight of the gun in his hands. "Gets lonely out here, but that's how I like it." Murdoch's eyes got narrow. He looked over the land with the care of a man who'd hunted people before. His eyes stayed on the fence posts, where Sarah's blood had dried dark against the old wood. "Funny thing," Murdoch said, getting off his horse with practiced ease. "We followed her trail right to your land. Blood trail too. Woman was hurt bad when she passed through." The other 3 riders spread out. Not scary exactly, but placed like men who knew how fights ended. Thorne knew this setup. He'd used it himself in another life. "Blood could be from anything," Thorne replied. "Coyotes hunt through here regular. Maybe your woman tangled with something with teeth." Murdoch smiled, but it was the kind of smile that came before violence. "Mind if we take a look around? Just to ease our minds." It wasn't really a question. Thorne could see that in the way Murdoch's hand rested near his gun. In the way the other men watched his every move. They'd searched his land whether he agreed or not. The only question was whether they'd kill him first or after. "Free country," Thorne said, stepping aside. "Though I'd appreciate you not disturbing my cattle. They spook easies." As Murdoch came toward the porch, Thorne saw something that made his blood run cold. Mud on the man's boots. But not just any mud. The special red clay that only came from one place in this area. The same clay that covered the Henderson land near Bedrock Canyon. Sarah had been telling the truth. Murdoch was close enough. Now that Thorne could smell the old whiskey on his breath, see the dried blood under his fingernails. This wasn't just a killer. This was a man who enjoyed his work. "Nice place you've got here, Whitmore," Murdoch said. His eyes took in every detail of the house. Quiet, private. The kind of place where a man could hide things. Or people. "I'm a simple rancher," Thorne replied. "Don't have much use for hiding anything." "Simple rancher." Murdoch laughed. "That's what they all say. But you know what I think? I think you got secrets, Whitmore. I can smell them on you." One of the other riders called out from near the barn. "Kane, found fresh horse tracks. Someone was here recent." Thorne's mind raced. Those would be his own tracks from this morning's ride to check the fence line. But Murdoch wouldn't know that. And in his current mood, the man was likely to think the worst. Murdoch's hand moved closer to his gun. "Thought you said you hadn't seen anyone." "I said I hadn't seen a soul. Didn't say I hadn't left my own land." Thorne kept his voice level, but his finger found the trigger of his gun. "Rode out to check my fence line this morning. Found some posts damaged. Probably the same animal that left that blood." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Thorne could feel the weight of the moment. The terrible balance between truth and lies, between safety and disaster. Then Murdoch smiled again. And Thorne knew that whatever happened next, his 12 years of peace were about to end in violence. The tension broke when Murdoch stepped onto the porch without being invited. That single act crossed a line Thorne had drawn in blood 12 years ago. No one entered his safe place without permission. "Let's have that look inside," Murdoch said. His hand now rested openly on his gun. Thorne raised his gun an inch. Not quite a threat, but close enough to make his position clear. "I'd rather you didn't." "Wasn't asking." Murdoch's three men moved closer. Their plans were written in the way they placed themselves. This was about to become a fight, and they all knew it. But before anyone could draw, a new sound cut through the tension. Hoofbeats coming fast from the east. A single rider pushing his horse hard across the open ground. Murdoch cursed under his breath. His attention split between Thorne and the coming stranger. In that moment of distraction, Thorne caught a glimpse of something that made his heart sink. One of Murdoch's men was looking at the ground near the porch, following a trail Thorne couldn't see but knew was there. Drops of Sarah's blood leading toward the house. The coming rider topped the ridge, and Thorne could see him clearly now. A young man, maybe 25, with the kind of desperate hurry that came from carrying bad news. He pulled up hard in front of the group. His horse was covered in sweat and breathing heavy. "Kane," the young man called out. "We got problems back in Bedrock. Sheriff's asking questions about the Henderson place." Someone tipped him off. Murdoch's face went dark with anger. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that end with a rope, if we don't clean this up fast." The young man's eyes darted to Thorne, then back to Murdoch. "We need to ride now." For a moment, Thorne thought he was saved. That Murdoch would be forced to give up his search and deal with the bigger threat. But then Murdoch's eyes fell on those drops of blood leading to the house. His expression changed to something much more dangerous. "Curtis," Murdoch said to the man following the blood trail. "What did you find?" Curtis pointed toward the house. "Blood trail leads right to the front door. She's here." The words hit Thorne like a physical blow. His lie had been discovered. And now 4 armed killers stood between him and the woman he'd promised to protect. Worse, they were desperate men facing a hangman's rope if they didn't silence every person who saw what they did. If you were Thorne, what would you do? Fight for armed men to protect a woman you barely know? Or try to talk your way out and hope they spare both your lives? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which side you'd choose. Because what Thorne decided next would decide whether either of them lived to see sunset. Murdoch drew his gun with practiced speed. "Bring her out, Whitmore. Do it now, and maybe we'll make this quick for both of you." But Thorne was already moving. His 12 years of being alone stripped away in an instant, showing the man he'd been before. A man who'd learned that sometimes the only choice is to fight. Thorne's gun cracked like thunder, and Curtis dropped before his gun cleared leather. The shot echoed across the plains like judgment. And suddenly, the quiet ranch became a battlefield. Murdoch dove behind his horse as Thorne's second shot split the porch post where his head had been. The other 2 men scattered, looking for cover behind the water trough and barn wall. Years of muscle memory kicked in. Thorne's hands worked the gun action smooth and fast, just like he'd learnt in the war. Just like he'd hoped never to use again. "You picked the wrong side, Whitmore." Murdoch shouted from behind his horse. All this for some woman you don't even know. Thorn didn't waste breath on an answer. He put a round through the water trough, sending the man behind it, scrambling for better cover. The messenger, young and clearly not used to gunfights, had turned his horse, and was riding hard back toward the ridge, apparently deciding that whatever waited in deadlock was better than Thorn's gun. Smart kid. Murdoch appeared around his horse's side, pistol blazing. Bullets chewed splinters from the porch railing as Thorn dropped flat, rolling behind the heavy wooden bench he'd built for quiet evenings he'd never have again. The silence that followed was worse than the gunfire. Thorn counted shots, figured angles, tried to remember everything he'd learned about staying alive when outnumbered. 2 men left besides Murdoch, both of them with clear shots at the house if he showed himself. Then he heard it, a sound that made his blood freeze. The trap door creaking open. "Don't," he called out, but it was too late. Sarah's voice drifted up from the cellar, weak but determined. "Let me help. I can shoot. Stay down." Thorn hissed, but she was already climbing up, a pistol in her hand. His spare Colt, that he'd kept in the emergency supplies. Murdoch heard the talk and laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "That's right, girl. Come on out. Let's finish what we started at the Henderson place." Sarah appeared beside Thorn. Her face was pale, but her hands were steady on the gun. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandages she'd put on, but her eyes burned with something beyond pain. "They killed a little girl," she whispered to Thorn. "Sarah Henderson. She was only 8 years old. Murdered her because she saw them kill her parents." The words hit Thorn like bullets. An 8-child. Suddenly this wasn't about protecting a stranger anymore. It was about justice for the innocent people these men had butchered. "How many rounds you got?" Thorn asked. 5 in the gun, plus whatever's in your belt." Thorn checked his gun. 3 rounds left. Against Murdoch and 2 experienced killers, it wouldn't be enough for a straight fight. But then he remembered something. The old mining explosive he kept in the barn for clearing stumps. Dangerous to store, but good for more than just moving rocks. "Can you keep them busy for 2 minutes?" he asked. Sarah nodded, though sweat beaded her forehead from pain and effort. "What are you planning?" "Something stupid." Thorn checked the distance to the barn. 30 yards of open ground where any of the 3 men could cut him down, but maybe stupid enough to work. He looked at this woman he'd known for less than an hour. This stranger, who'd brought violence back into his carefully ordered world. She could have stayed hidden, could have let him face this alone. Instead, she'd chosen to stand with him. "Ready?" he asked. Sarah got into position at the corner of the porch, Colt steady in her hands. For Sarah Henderson, Thorn sprinted toward the barn as Sarah opened fire. Her shots forced Murdoch and his men to keep their heads down. But 30 yards had never seemed so far, and Thorn knew that any second, one of those killers would risk Sarah's bullets for a clean shot at his back. Thorn's boots hit the barn floor as a bullet whistled past his ear, close enough to feel the heat. Behind him, Sarah's Colt barked steadily, keeping the killers honest. He dove toward the corner, where he kept the mining supplies, hands searching frantically for the small wooden box marked with skull and crossbones. There, 2 sticks of dynamite, fuses intact, enough explosive to level half the barn, or turn the tide of this fight. His fingers found the matches as another bullet punched through the barn wall, showering him with splinters. Outside, Sarah's shooting had stopped. Either she was reloading, or she was down. Thorn didn't have time to find out which. He lit the first fuse with shaking hands. The spark caught with a sharp hiss. 20 seconds, maybe 30, before it blew. He sprinted back toward the barn door, dynamite in one hand, gun in the other. Sarah was still alive, crouched behind the porch railing with blood running down her arm from a fresh graze. She saw him come out of the barn and nodded. She understood what he was planning. Murdoch's voice rang out across the ranch. "Give it up, Whitmore. You're outgunned and outmanned. Send the girl out, and maybe I'll let you live." Instead of answering, Thorn threw the dynamite toward the water trough where 2 of Murdoch's men had taken cover. The stick tumbled end over end, fuse sparking like a fallen star. The explosion shattered the morning air, sending dirt and debris skyward in a massive geyser. When the dust cleared, one of Murdoch's men was still on the ground. The other was crawling away, stunned and bleeding. But Murdoch himself had used the chaos to advance, and suddenly he was at the porch steps, gun trained on Sarah's head. "Drop it, Whitmore." Murdoch's face was a mask of rage and desperation. "Drop it, or I paint your porch with her brains." Thorn froze, gun halfway to his shoulder. 30 feet separated him from Murdoch, but it might as well have been 30 miles. At this range, the killer couldn't miss. Sarah looked at Thorne across that impossible distance, and he saw something in her eyes that made his chest tighten. Not fear, acceptance. She'd made peace with dying. Probably made it back in Death Canyon when she decided to be the witness these killers couldn't silence. Don't, she said quietly. Don't let him win. But Murdoch was already squeezing the trigger when the second stick of dynamite, the one Thorne had lit but kept hidden behind his back, rolled to a stop at the killer's feet. Murdoch's eyes went wide as he realized what was happening. He had perhaps 3 seconds to choose between shooting Sarah and diving for cover. He chose wrong. The blast lifted Murdoch off his feet and threw him backward, his gun spinning away into the dust. When the ringing in Thorne's ears faded, the ranch was silent except for the wind and the distant lowing of spooked cattle. Sarah was alive, shaken but breathing. Murdoch lay still near the shattered remains of the porch steps. The surviving gunman had disappeared entirely, probably decided that whatever the sheriff in Deadrock might do to him was better than facing more explosives. Thorne walked slowly to where Sarah sat, his gun still ready but no longer needed. She looked up at him with those green eyes that had changed everything. Is it over? She asked. Thorne looked over his destroyed ranch, the shattered porch, the crater where his water trough used to be, the blood soaking into earth that had known only peace for 12 years. Yeah, he said, reaching down to help her stand. It's over. 3 days later, Sheriff Morrison arrived from Deadrock Canyon with a group of men and questions. He found Thorne fixing his porch while Sarah sat nearby, her wounds healing, but her presence permanent in ways neither of them had planned. Morrison was a good man, honest in a territory where honesty was often deadly. He listened to their story, looked at the bodies, and nodded when Thorne handed over the silver, or that Murdoch had been carrying. Evidence of the silver claim that had gotten the Henderson family killed. Henderson found a vein worth killing for, Morrison explained, hefting the ore sample. Murdoch and his crew figured they could eliminate the family and claim the strike for themselves. They almost got away with it. The sheriff's eyes lingered on Sarah, taking in her healing injuries and the determined set of her jaw. You willing to testify in court about what you saw? Every word, Sarah replied without hesitation. Sarah Henderson deserves that much. Morrison nodded and turned to Thorne. And you've got quite a reputation from your war days. Some folks might wonder why a man with your skills chose to hide out here for so long. Thorne's hands stilled on the wood he was smoothing. Sometimes a man needs to find peace before he can make it for others. Well, you made plenty of peace here. Murdoch's gang was terrorizing half the territory. Word's already spreading about what happened. You might find folks coming by to shake your hand. The thought of visitors, of his isolation, being permanently broken, should have filled Thorne with dread. Instead, he found himself glancing at Sarah, who was watching him with something that looked like hope. After Morrison and his men left, taking the bodies and their grim evidence, Thorne and Sarah sat on the partially rebuilt porch, as sunset painted the sky in shades of fire. You could go anywhere now, Thorne said quietly. Morrison offered to escort you to Denver, help you start fresh where nobody knows your story. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching the cattle move across the pasture in the dying light. And you? What will you do? Same as always, I suppose. Work the ranch. Tend the cattle. He paused, then looked at her directly. Though it occurs to me that this place could use a woman's touch, and maybe some extra hands for the work. Are you offering me a job, Thorne Whitmore? I'm offering you a home, if you want it. Sarah's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. I've been running for so long, I'd forgotten what home felt like. It feels like this, Thorne said. And for the first time in 12 years, he meant it. 6 months later, travelers passing through the territory would tell stories of the peaceful ranch, where a scarred man and a green-eyed woman built something beautiful from the ashes of violence. They raised cattle and children, welcomed strangers, and never spoke of the day when blood on fence posts changed everything. Thorne kept his gun cleaned and ready, but he never had to use it again. Some battles, once won, stay won, and some peace, once earned, lasts forever. The ranch that had sheltered one broken soul became a sanctuary for 2 healing hearts, proving that sometimes the best things in life begin with the courage to help a stranger in need. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel now. Click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one. More intense, more profound, the kind that makes your soul pause and your heart race.